Hello, welcome back. We are going to be exploring feminist theory and how to do a critical reading with it. So in this video, we'll be looking at a couple of different sources and then talking about how you might be able to apply those when you do a close reading of literature. We're going to be looking at Lois Tyson's Critical Theory Today, which is a secondary text that explains, broad concepts and introduces different feminist thinkers. And then we'll also look at Bell Hook's Feminism, Crying for Our Souls, which is a primary source that was that I got out of a women's study journal. So between the secondary source and the primary source, we'll have a pretty good foundation for how to do a feminist reading. So I'm going to talk a little bit first about Tyson, and then I'll talk about bell hooks. So the chapter in Tyson explains these broad concepts, and it references scholars who are really major in the field of feminism. So scholars such as Simone de Beauvoir, Julia Kristeva, Kimberly Crenshaw, Chimamanda Adichie. These might sound familiar to you. There are a lot more scholars who are referenced in this book, but those particularly stood out to me as people I'm pretty accustomed to hearing about, pretty familiar with. So these are very major figures in the movement. This book also the chapter in this book also talks about the multiple nature of feminism. So it talks about disagreements that are happening. In fact, a lot of scholars will say feminisms with an S at the end instead of feminism because there's so many different ways to express this field. It also talks about all the different concentrations, which, where the S in the feminists, feminisms, I should say, comes from. So there's this idea of materialist feminism, where political, economic, and social environments sort of essentialize women, and you'll be able to read more details about that. Psychological feminism. This is the idea that the experience of being a woman is delved into, and the idea is that society is heavily influenced by male thinking. So the defaults and the assumptions and the norms and the language are all centered around the male experience. So women become sort of like the other, where men are like the real deal and then women are like the other thing, right? Because they aren't part of all of these assumptions and language expectations. There's also multiculturalism discussed in this book. So in feminism, that means intersectionality is the only way that you can understand how to really have how to have a freeing experience with feminism. Because if you aren't considering that women also have other identities such as race, able-bodiedness, economic situations, even religion, nationality, if you don't take into account all of those things, you're not really you're not getting to the core of the oppression that feminism is trying to address. This book also talks about gender and how the complicated relationship between gender and sex and sexuality makes feminism a multifaceted sort of conundrum that we need to wrestle with. There are endless complications to what we need to consider when it comes to feminism. The chapter also lays out the 4 waves of feminism. So we're in the 4th wave right now. The first wave started back in the 1800s, and it just gives a brief description of what the concentrations have been in each of those waves. One thing this book also does is talks about the role of men in the feminist movement. And this is, I think, an important aspect of the book, and Lois Tyson expresses it as an important aspect of the book because sometimes negative assumptions or maybe even strange past experiences or fears can play a role in just kind of rejecting a lot of aspects of feminism before they even start. And she just explains how feminism, when done right, has an intention of making men's lives better too. Because when we talk about all these difficult situations that are affecting women in negative ways, those are also the situations that are affecting men in negative ways. For example, the idea is that men cannot express emotion and men have to always be head of the household, and things like that. Men cannot be ever seen as weak. These are all things that hurt men too. So feminism, Lois Tyson wants to emphasize, is a positive movement for society. So all of these things are present in here, and along with it, a lot of terminology, concepts, and you're going to have just a wealth of ideas that you can draw from in this chapter when you're doing your close reading of literature. So this is a secondary source where she's just like gathering up a bunch of different ideas and referencing them directly to give us an idea of a larger picture of feminism. I'm also asking you to read a primary source, and that is Feminism, Crying for Our Souls by Bell Hooks. I picked this reading because I really enjoy Bell Hooks. She has this huge, she's not alive anymore, but she has this huge body of work that draws from so many different aspects of critical theory. One of her major influences is Paulo Freire, and if anybody's familiar with Paulo Freire, he's a Brazilian educator and philosopher who I really like a lot, and he has this idea that the power for change has to come from the people who need that change, not from the people who are in control of things. And it's a liberatory mindset. Liberatory consciousness is what he will call it. And it's really, really cool. But anyway, he's somebody who really influences Bell Hooks. And Bell Hooks is a really cool scholar who I follow a lot. And this particular piece that's more on feminism by her is, I think, interesting. And it's not a super long read. And it kind of gets to the core of everyday thinking about feminism. So she talks about how the feminist movement has to be both a political movement and a personal movement. And we can't lose sight of the fact that this isn't just a big political task we're carrying out. It has to connect with individual people. So the movement can only be successful if all of the individuals within it have a sense of wellness and a sense of control over themselves, right? So how do you rectify this large societal shift with the well-being of the individuals who are going through it? That's a big concern of hers that she thinks is often overlooked. And this piece is older. I think it's 1995, but still totally relevant to what we're talking about. The idea of feminism is that it has to improve individual lives. It just can't be this sweeping cultural and political movement that changes policy from the top. If individuals who are being affected with this movement aren't feeling like their lives have improved because of it, then it's not really going to go anywhere. Mental wellness is something that she was concentrating a lot on in this article. So if the libertarian movement is this big political unit, I guess, then all of the individual people who are working in it are all smaller units within that. And if the smaller units are broken, then the large unit's going to be broken. She also talks about how women and men all need to feel like feminism has improved their lives. The idea of feminism is to improve lives, not to be vindictive or to get even or anything like that. And, I think sometimes people will express it that way. But the true spirit of it is that when everybody has equality, everybody's lives are better. And only by attending to the mental wellness of each individual person can we ever achieve that. She says, don't be smug or complacent when we get these victories. What we really need to do is make sure that we're thinking of all the individuals and how their lives can be better individually in their homes, etc. She suggests that therapy should be a little bit more accepted. I think this is 30 years old, so I think it maybe is a little bit more accepted, but she wants therapy to be a little bit more, therapists doing therapy to be a little bit more aware of the specifics of what needs to happen in the feminist movement. So being a feminist therapist having her eyes open to all the issues of equality is what she is looking for. She also values self-help books. Um, she wants there to be more of those. She talks about how much those have helped her. And of course, she does talk a little bit about a self-help book that she has written. I'm personally not a fan of self-help books, but that's where she's going with this. And it has, the idea here, though, is that whatever resources we can use to be individually healthy and to help others be individually healthy is an overlooked part of this movement. So that's just a rundown of both those sources. You're gonna have to, do a bunch of reading to really get the details of it. And I want you to be using the details of these pieces of theory when you're doing your reading. Don't make your reading just sort of a general, like, well, here's a reading about how men and women need to be equal. That's really not gonna it's not gonna get you where you need to go. So find some specific ideas and specific concepts and use a concept or two from the readings and apply it to the literature that you're going to be doing the reading of. So you're going to be reading The Yellow Wallpaper, which it's an easy match for feminism and for all the stuff that's being talked about here. So I think you're going to find tons and tons of opportunities to think about a specific concept or a couple concepts from the readings that you've done and apply it to a close reading of The Yellow Wallpaper. So read the entire story so that you understand The Yellow Wallpaper holistically and you understand everything that happened. And then when you do your reading, you'll be able to pick out a small selection and look at it very, very closely and pull all the language out of it and analyze it, but also demonstrate that you have a holistic understanding of the whole thing. That is one of the things that becomes really difficult. You need to be able to explain the whole story so that you understand why you're looking at the small section that you're looking at. Even though you're not necessarily going to be literally doing that in the assignment, since the assignment is short. It's one of those, just something that just takes practice, repetition over and over, and I'll continue to give you pointers on it when I look at your paper. So I really want you to use just something specific from these theoretical texts. So I'll give you some examples here of some things that might work for you. So in the Tyson reading, there is this idea of the universalism of the white male, particularly the white male. So whenever all of the language and assumptions in society are just kind of coming from this sort of like powerful white male general perspective, other people are left out. And anybody who doesn't have that sort of perspective, that sort of personality, that kind of existence is like not quite normal. They're just a little bit off. There's something else, right? Another idea is the idea of traditional marriage roles. So, take a look at what she has to say specifically about traditional marriage roles. And, that could be a point of reflection for, when you're doing your reading. There's a really cool idea in there about false binaries, and this is something that's used a lot in feminism and also in other theories, particularly post-structuralism and deconstruction, which we'll be getting at soon. But this idea of false binaries, we create these binaries of things that aren't actually binaries, but we build our thinking around them as if they are. So one of the examples in this reading was good girl versus bad girl. So like if you're aligning to all the norms of patriarchal society, then you're a good girl. If you're not, then you're a bad girl. So it's good versus bad, right? But really, that's not a binary. It's not two opposite things. It's just a person trying to express themselves in the world. Another binary, false binary, would be the mind and the heart. So, this idea that the way it would be applied here would be men live in their minds, women live in their hearts. So men are logical, women are emotional. Really, we all have all of that going on. So we're creating a false binary there by assigning these different traits, right? Culture versus nature. This one is used in lots of different theories, and it can be used in feminism too. Culture versus nature. When you think about the Yellow Wallpaper, you can be thinking about what's the cultural disposition of our protagonist versus what actually is she, or what's the natural way for events to unfold versus what's the cultural imposition that's being put on these events. Things like that, right? Male-centered language is another example that you might use as a lens. It's not just that there is a universal he in grammar. That's starting to go away, but it's kind of stubbornly going away because it's kind of difficult to deal with not using the universal he, right? But I mean, all of the assumptions of maleness and certain kinds of logic that happen in language that could leave other kinds of thinking out. That's dealt with a lot in this chapter, and I think it'd be really fun. Like if I were going to be doing this, I would probably use the ideas of language. Um, Intersectionality is another, thing that you might use as sort of a lens to look through. So, how is this main character in the story intersectional? She's a woman, yes, but what else is she? She's somebody maybe who has mental illness. Um, how much of this mental illness has been manufactured by the situation she's been put in, or how much of it seems like maybe it was already there? What are all the intricacies of it? How can you find a small section and tease out a whole bunch of language that can be seen through this idea of intersectionality? The bell hooks reading also has some really interesting possibilities. So bell hooks is talking about individual wellness versus larger movements. So if you think about feminism as a whole, and then you're also thinking about our main character as an individual, what's there that you can say? And read the bell hooks piece and think and find the specifics of how she's expressing that, so you can express it more specifically in your reading too. Therapy and self-help. There's a lot of therapy and self-help stuff going on in this story. You could be thinking specifically about what bell hooks said about it and applying that the best that you could. This idea that feminism needs to be seen as something positive for everyone. So something positive in individual households with individual families, individual marriages. How could that be applied to this story? That could be really interesting too. So there are a lot more specific concepts from these readings that you could use. I just wanted to give you some examples of specific things, so that you can have a good handle on how you can do a reading that has depth and isn't just talking generally about, female equality or traditional marriage, but like looks specifically at some of the concepts within these and then does a reading. So remember, you're gonna take a small section of the story. In the assignment, I think I say a paragraph or two. This story has a lot of kind of choppy dialogue, very small, short sentences, and they're written that way for purposes, right? So just estimate what you think the equivalent of a paragraph or two would be. It doesn't have to literally be a paragraph or two if a paragraph is 1 line long, 2 lines long. Use your judgment. Do a deep reading and demonstrate that you are deeply engaging with a theory concept while you're doing your reading and bringing new knowledge out of this excerpt that you're looking at. You're not just going to be looking online and saying, what are the themes of this, and then trying to demonstrate one of those themes. You're going to be trying to bring something new, something novel, something that maybe hasn't been thought about before, and bringing it to light. All while still understanding that there's a larger context of this story that has to be respected as you're doing your reading. This is complicated kind of thinking. But we're going to keep drilling on this for a few more weeks here. The second half of this course is going to change a little bit. Maybe not literally the second half, but I'd say around like maybe week 9 or something. I'm going to ask you to start doing some different things. It's not going to be just these short 300-word readings where you're demonstrating that you can do it. You're going to start to have a little bit more agency in what you're doing and write some longer things. But I'll get back to that later. For now, just keep on concentrating on applying these specific lenses as well as you can, with as much discipline as you can, and know that it's going to pay off for you when you start to be able to do your own thing a little bit more. All right, I'm going to wrap this up. Good luck with your reading. Enjoy it. This could be really fun for a lot of people, and I'll see you in the next video.